and my experience is blah, blah, blah.
Exists and that everything is equivalent. So there's no, so we're taught to question, and then we're not taught any source of authority
Right.
on what the answers to those questions might be. So sort of a,
It's all very subjective, right? Yeah, good. Were you going to say something about?
yeah. But I think I forgot your question.
Oh, just what are some of the other... So the idea being that in our society today, people think, well, if you're a skeptic, it's because you've finally like been enlightened. You took some college classes that taught you that science can explain everything, and now we really know the answers to all these things. So Christianity kind of seems like a thing that a caveman would be interested in, you know? But you're seeing from some of these quotes here that every skeptic that you run into, it's not because they've been enlightened and they know a bunch of stuff that we don't know. There's things other than pure objectivity that's driving their skepticism. Yeah.
I want to say like hypocrisy, like they see
Yes.
Christians live in one way,
Right.
nowhere in another way.
So whenever I study with atheists, one of the first things that I do, we kind of round table it, and I go, okay, I want you to identify, like, what's your name and what do you identify as in terms of religion? So, like, I'll say I'm Erik, I'm a Christian, and then they'll be like, I'm blah, 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 I'm a secular humanist. And they'll kind of go around and saying that I'm the atheistic kind, or I'm the agnostic kind, or whatever. And when we do all of that, one of the questions that I ask them is, tell me about your religious experience growing up. And almost all of them say, I had a hypocritical dad, or I went to a boring church growing up, or I had a really bad experience with a religious leader of some sort, or something like that. Now, that means that for a lot of those people, the thing that started their unbelief was a bad experience and an emotional reaction to that from that bad experience. Is that because they've been really enlightened, or is that a reaction to something? You know what I mean? So whenever you're talking with skeptics, one of the things that's really critical, I think, for Christians to know is you should not be intimidated by their logic, or you shouldn't be intimidated by the facts that they allegedly know and all this kind of stuff. There's things that are underlying the data that they want to throw out there. And the real conversations are things like, what is it that God has said that you don't like? Or have you considered that maybe in your college setting that you'd be really weird if you were a Christian and it's more peer pressure or something like that? It's important to peel some of that back. But because our society is so subjective, and because so much of skepticism doesn't derive from objective truths and logic and all this kind of thing, what's the approach to teaching people in our secular society today that could maybe help make sense of the gospel and what Jesus has done, things like that? That's what I try to do when I study with skeptics. So here's my approach to them, is I want to try to show them why Christianity is subjectively appealing. If so many people are trying to determine what they want to do because this is what I like, or this is what I identify as, or this is what resonates with me, would it stand to reason that God would know our psychology, and he would know what we need, and he would actually have the best answers for those things too? So there's a subjective appeal to Christianity, and so here's what we do. When we compare Christianity to the secular worldview, we show that Christianity has better resources for the things that, whether you're a Christian or a skeptic, we all know that we need. And I'm going to list those things out in just a moment. And so another way of saying this, in a post-truth culture, subjective evidence is maybe the most helpful starting place. Do you guys know what post-truth means? No. Okay. Oxford English Dictionary in 2016, every year they have a word that's supposed to like capture something about that year. And in 2016, it was the word post-truth. And what the word post-truth means is that you derive what you believe not from facts and data, but from what subjectively is appealing to you. So the idea of that is that we live in a post-truth culture. And so if somebody that I'm studying with, or somebody, maybe, how many of you have friends that are skeptics, or relatives that are skeptics, or something like this? My hope is that these classes will at least give you some confidence that you can have conversations with them, and some guidance in what you could bring up with them. But also that this could help inoculate us from some of the things that's happening in our society today, if you've ever had questions or been worried about certain things. Okay, so here's what we're going to do in these classes. Why isn't this working? Did the battery just stop working? Oh, okay, here we go. What were you going to say? Nothing. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah. So what I like to call what we're going to do is subjective evidences. Whenever you've, oh yeah, I remember what I was going to say now, sorry. So if you're going to study with somebody that has emotional reasons for their unbelief, do you think that showing them archaeological evidence for the Bible, logical evidences for the existence of God, all those kinds of things, is that really meeting them where they're at? What does it mean to meet somebody where they're at if they have emotional reasons for unbelief? You come up with emotional reasons for belief. That's what it means to meet somebody in the middle in a situation like that. Have you ever had a friend that was a skeptic, and you're like, well, here's the cosmological argument for God, and here's archaeological evidence for God, and maybe 8% of people in our society today will be objective enough to go, okay, yeah, I like that. But most people are really subjective with the way that they try to think through these things. And so the subjective evidences, I think, is going to be the most helpful place to start. And then after that, you show them the objective evidences. I'll say more about that as we go through this series. But here's some questions. The basic questions that guide this whole approach are questions like this. Do your beliefs contradict one another? You're trying to take the secular worldview and say, do you have views that cannot coexist? In other words, do you have incoherency in your worldview? Here's another question. Does human experience fit what you believe? So, for example, a skeptic might believe that we came about from the strong eating the weak, but yet the skeptic today might care about equal human rights. Do those things flow? Does that fit their worldview? You know what I mean? So that's one of those examples of things that we'll end up bringing up. Number 3, do you embrace the logical conclusions of your beliefs? One example of that is if you don't think that there is an objective right and wrong, is what Hitler did okay? So you're trying to kind of take the roof off. You're trying to take what they believe to its logical conclusions and see if they're okay with that. And what we're going to do is we're going to do questions like this filtered on these 5 needs: meaning, identity, morality, and hope, and community. Now, for these classes on identity, morality, and hope, you don't have to prepare for any of these classes. I'm going to have the handouts like what we have right now. But what I would like you guys to do for this whole month is help me think through this topic of community. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically, with all of these topics, is we're going to compare what does the secular worldview give you with regards to meaning in life, and what does the Christian worldview give you. And we're going to show them that by comparison, the Christian worldview has got better resources for these things that we need. Does that make sense? Okay, so as we go through this series, if you guys do any looking up online or on the YouTubes or anything, try to be thinking about this one for the whole month. And come to me. Please bring me your research, because this is something that I have not studied with skeptics before. But whenever I study with skeptics, they all say that we have not figured out how to have community, but you Christians do. And so that's something that they're envious of. So my question will be, why is it that skepticism and secular worldviews can't really create a real community? And what is it that's unique about Christianity that can create that? That's what I want to have you guys come to me with at the end of all of these first 4 classes. All right. Does anybody have any comments or questions so far? This is just a little bit of a survey of where we're going in these classes. Is this making sense? If anybody needs me to slow down for something. Okay. So what we're going to do then is you can get your sheet out that was given to you. We're going to look at the secular approach to finding meaning in life. And before we start looking at some of these quotes, how would you define what meaning in life is? And would we agree that the precursor to that, everybody would agree that we need meaning in life, right? Skeptic, atheist, Christian, Buddhist, monk, whatever. Everybody thinks that we need meaning in life. So what is meaning in life? What does it mean to have meaning? What does meaning mean? Yeah, you got a purpose. So what you do counts forever. There's some longevity to what you do. And also so there's a forward-looking aspect that I'm here for a purpose. Or maybe that's the backward-looking aspect of it, that I'm here for some reason based on where I've come from, and what I do counts forever. That's kind of the idea of meaning. Yes, Blake?
With the question that you'd be asking yourself is, why am I here?
Yeah, why am I here, and what's left after I'm gone? Yeah, that would be one way to say that. And by the way, skeptics and atheists, do you think they have an approach to meaning in life? Do you think they've got some sophisticated answers to why they might want, how they would figure out what their meaning in life is? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do these first 2 quotes, and all I'm trying to do is understand their worldview. I'm not trying to deconstruct it yet. We're about to do that. But these are some quotes that I show to skeptics when I study with them, and they like these quotes. They agree with these quotes. And they say, yes, these accurately represent what I believe. Stephen Jay Gould, in 1988, Life magazine did a Meaning in Life magazine. It's not episode. What is it? Issue. Yeah, that's the word I'm thinking of. And so they asked a bunch of famous people, what's your meaning in life and how do you derive this? Stephen Jay Gould was a pretty famous evolutionist, and he said, this was his answer in the magazine. We are here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures. Because the earth never froze entirely during an ice age. We may yearn for a higher answer, but none exists. This explanation, though superficially troubling, if not terrifying, is ultimately liberating and exhilarating. We must construct these answers for ourselves. All right. So on the one hand, does he acknowledge that there is no meaning in life? Yeah, you kind of. So why are we here, according to this guy? By chance. There was a fish that got lucky enough to fin its way up off of the out of the water onto the shore or something, and then that somehow did some things and all this kind of stuff. And there was one ice age where not everything froze entirely, and had that happened, we would all not be here today. So in other words, the way he's saying this is that there's no higher answer. We're here by luck, almost by accident. And so he says, on the one hand, in a transcendent way, there is no God that created us. We don't have to answer to any kind of God. There's no reason we're here. But he doesn't stop there. What does he say, though, about how he tries to find meaning in life? Yeah, you get to construct your own meaning in life. Have you ever heard anybody talk that way? That, there's no God that we have to answer to, but my life is still meaningful, and I have meaning in my life, even if I know that it's not going to last forever. Now, here's another example of this. Dr. Adam Rutherford, he's got a pretty famous podcast, I believe it is. And he says this: a meaningless universe does not mean we live our lives without purpose. I am an atheist, but I try to live my life replete with purpose. I'm skipping. No, I did put it out of the PowerPoint. But I try to live my life replete with purpose. Be kind, learn and discover as much as you can. Share that knowledge. Relieve suffering when you can. Have tons of fun. I think he's British. That's why it's not pointless. We have the power to create life and to show those lives wonder. Surely that's enough. It is for me. All right, what's his answer to this? Yeah. Which, by the way, in 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul says, eat, drink, and be merry if Christ, those are all like very physical things. Eating, drinking, being happy. He's saying that the only thing that really exists if Jesus didn't raise from the dead is really just the physical things. But he's saying, my meaning in life is to do all of these different sorts of things. Now, we can start to deconstruct this a little bit. What are the things that he brings up as things that he finds meaning in? Yeah, power to create life. What else? Knowledge. What else?
Others.
Yeah, helping others. What about having tons of fun? That's a cool one. Anybody like to have fun? How well would this apply to somebody that lives in Sierra Leone? Do you realize that this approach to meaning in life, only flies in a society that's very privileged? And most people in the world, if you were to take this quote to somebody that's suffering in India, maybe they're a homeless person that really has legitimately been neglected by family, the caste systems cast them out, or whatever it is, and so they're really destitute. And then they say, hey, I'm looking for deep answers in life, and you say, well, you show this quote from Dr. Adam Rutherford. Do you think this guy would walk up to somebody that's on the street, and you don't know how long he has to live, and say, well, this is your meaning in life? With that in mind, go out and be happy. This only applies to people who are privileged. So you hear a lot of people in the United States saying this, or maybe in the UK saying this, but you don't hear a lot of people in really poor countries working with this idea here. Okay, so that's one way to deconstruct this. And by the way, when I study with skeptics, these are the sort of things that I start to say is, okay, do you guys see any weaknesses with this? And you start to analyze some of those things. Do you guys have any other initial things you'd say about deconstructing this? Because we're going to spend a little bit of time doing that with some other quotes here. Yeah, Blake?
Is there an aspect of the first question, or first quote, where the last little bit about where he says about the explanation, that that's not a ton different than what they would, I guess,
Oh yeah, for sure.
But it is liberating and exhilarating.
Yeah, you
Like,
take
believing in a God is kind of terrifying
right.
on the surface.
So there's terror either way.
Yeah, and that's kind of, when I saw the quote, I was like, wow, what's different about them and us when it comes to the reaction to
Right.
the explanation.
Yep, that's good. Any other initial thoughts on this? By the way, one thing that I'd be curious about throughout these is if you guys can find other people in our society saying similar kinds of things to this. I'm about to teach some of this stuff to a high school group at Embry Hills, and I can't use all these kind of quotes with them. So if you guys can find like Miley Cyrus saying any of this kind of stuff, let me know, or whoever people are that young people like. Okay, so let's start to deconstruct this by using some other quotes from some other people that skeptics would at least have some degree of respect for. Leo Tolstoy, the famous Russian author, I really like this quote. He wrote a book called The Confessions, and in the book what he's doing is he's showing why he was so disenchanted with the Hollywood of his day, the other writers at the writer guilds and stuff. It's a really good book. And what he does is he explains like why those people were dissatisfying to be around, and the needs that he had that led him to some kind of belief in God, even though it was misguided. Like he at least got to this point where he believed in a higher being. I'm sorry, I missed your comment. Were you going to say something?
It's okay.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's a quote from Leo. So what we're going to see in these next two quotes is that this approach to meaning, that I get to decide what my meaning in life is that it's very intellectually irritating. Now let me show you how this works. Look at what Leo Tolstoy said here. I could give no reasonable meaning to any single action or to my whole life. I was only surprised that I could have avoided understanding this from the very beginning. It has been so long to all. Today or tomorrow sickness and death will come. They had come already, to those I love or to me. Nothing will remain but stench and worms. Sooner or later my affairs, whatever they may be, will be forgotten, and I shall not exist. Then why go on making any effort? How can man fail to see this? And how go on living? That is what is surprising. One can only live while one is intoxicated with life. As soon as one is sober, it is impossible not to see that it is all a mere fraud, and a stupid fraud. That is precisely what it is. There is nothing either amusing or witty about it. It is simply cruel and stupid. So he's saying here that, and there's other parts of the book where he wrote this book when he was around 50, and he was still really healthy. He was really smart. He had a beautiful family. He had everything anybody would ever want. Really famous writer. And even though he has all of these things, somebody could look at him and say, well, you've really forged your meaning in life. We still talk about the books that he wrote today. And it seems like he was here to write books and all this kind of stuff. But even with all of the things that he has that none of us will ever have, what was frustrating to him in this quote? Yeah. Yeah, when he dies, it's all going to go away. Sickness is going to come. Death is going to end. All of these things. What else do you notice here?
Eventually, everything he's done will be forgotten.
Yeah, everything eventually is going to be forgotten. So what about some kind of legacy, like Song of Solomon, or the Book of Ecclesiastes, when Solomon talks about like people won't remember you a couple generations from your death and things like this. So like here's what you see with Leo Tolstoy. He could go on thinking like a drunk person. I like this imagery that he uses here. Thinking like he's intoxicated. He could think like a drunk person, but the moment that he thought soberly, like, oh yeah, like there's no ultimate meaning in life, it was really troubling to him. And these are the kinds of nagging thoughts that eventually led him to some belief in God. So one of the things that I'm trying to do when I study with skeptics is prod them and poke them to think about some of these questions that might be kind of scary for them to think about, that might not be comfortable for them to think about. Any other thoughts or comments on this one? All right, I like this one from C.S. Lewis. He says, you might decide to simply have as good a time as possible. The universe is a universe of nonsense, but since you are here, grab what you can. Unfortunately, you can't, except in the lowest animal sense, be in love with a girl, if you know and keep remembering that all the beauties both of her person and of her character are a momentary and accidental pattern produced by a collision of atoms, and that your own response to them is only a sort of psychic phosphorescence arriving from the behavior of your genes. You can't go on getting very serious pleasure from music. New Iron Maiden CD is coming out tomorrow. If you know and remember that its air is significance is a pure illusion, that you like it only because your nervous system is irrationally conditioned to like it. You may still, in the lowest sense, have a good time, but just insofar as it becomes very good, just insofar as it ever threatens to push you on from cold sensuality into real warmth and enthusiasm and joy, so far as you will be forced to feel the hopeless disharmony between your own emotions and the universe in which you really live. All right. He's starting with this premise as he's reasoning with people that your worldview says that evolutionary biology and all these chemicals that are just reacting in our brain, it's all this physical thing that you really don't have any control over, that there's no like physical, spiritual, non-material thing in existence. And so with that in mind, he brings up a couple concrete examples like being in love or listening to music that imagine like, oh, I think she's the one and all this kind of thing, and I think I might get married to her next month and all this kind of stuff. Blake, and so if you have a secular worldview, like the moment you really start enjoying something, what do you start bumping into mentally?
Depends if you're drunk or sober.
It depends if you're drunk or sober, right? What about moments when you're sober?
Well, to referencing the previous code, if you're sober, then it's nothingness, it's physicality, it's reaction, it's
Right.
under control.
Like, how can you really get lost in anything? Like, the moment you start to really enjoy a really great story, or you fall in love, or there's some music that you're really getting into, and like, this worldview says that, okay, well, what's really, step back for a second, what's really happening is these chemicals in my brain are acting in this way, and it's all really illogical and all this kind of stuff. But it sure feels like in the moment that there's something beyond the material, because I feel like I'm tapping into something deeper than that. You see what he's saying there? And so, any reactions or thoughts to these first two quotes as we start to deconstruct this approach to meaning?
Seems kind of frustrating.
Yeah, and this is what you're trying to help people see. Is like, are you really satisfied? Like, what's your favorite kind of music? You really think that you're just enjoying that because predetermination happened through all these things that evolutionary biology got started off with the Big Bang Theory and all, and it's all very irrational, but you're somehow enjoying this? Does that bother you, Kelly?
I was thinking of a very pretty fact, something that is artful, that is fragile, and how you drop it, and it's gone. Nothing you can do to put it back together, Humpty Dumpty.
Right.
And that's a very, just, you can hold that example, it's like, it all just becomes inanimate.
Right. I've always wondered with Humpty Dumpty when it says all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again, what were the horses doing? Like, Humpty fell in one spot. It's not like they have to carry all the pieces of Humpty Dumpty. I don't know what the horses were trying to do. But yeah, it's a good point. So the first weakness, major weakness of the secular approach is that the moment that you try to think deeply about your worldview, it becomes very depressing. So you kind of have to think like a drunk person, and that's what Leo Tolstoy said. I tried to make sure that I was trying to do that, and I couldn't always think that way, and then it was really bad. So, but what about like, do you think everybody in our society is a very deep thinker? No. So one of the things that I point out when I study with the skeptics is that, that these quotes with Leo Tolstoy and C.S. Lewis, they only apply to people who are deep thinkers. So maybe they apply to you, maybe they don't. But there's another thing that applies to everybody that is a weakness in this worldview, and that is that suffering is going to happen to everybody. Look at this quote from Bertrand Russell. He was a famous atheist. He wrote this article. It's an essay that he wrote, I think, in 1902. But he says this: "To every man comes sooner or later the great renunciation. For the young there is nothing unattainable. A good thing is desired with the whole force of a passionate will, and yet impossible. It is to them not credible. Yet by death, by illness, by poverty, or by the voice of duty, we must learn, each one of us, that the world was not made for us, and that however beautiful may be the things we crave, fate may nevertheless forbid them." All right, so what he's saying here is that young people might think, well, my meaning in life is going to be my family, or my career, or my education, or whatever. And he says, okay, yeah, as long as you're young. By the way, he wrote this when I think he was like 33 or something like this. When he wrote this, he's arguing here that eventually what's going to happen to this little pretty idea of what you have for your meaning in life?
You'll realize the truth eventually.
And what's going to teach it to you?
The hard way.
Yeah, illness, poverty, death. Doesn't suffering happen to like, what if my meaning in life was my family? Yeah. Could one car accident take my meaning in life away from me then? What if my meaning in life is my intellect and how smart I am? Couldn't one TBI end all that for me? Traumatic brain injury? Like that could just mess everything up that I took so much pride and stock in and all this different sort of thing. And so eventually suffering happens to everybody. So if you're not intellectually irritated by this, by trying to think deeply about things, one day something's going to, and I like how Bertrand Russell says, he specifically brings up young people here, that right now you think everything's rosy in your future, and that's not the case. And so it's a dose of reality. Sounds a little bit like what Ecclesiastes would say. All right, do you guys have any thoughts or comments on either of these quotes? The top level view of it being intellectually irritating, or the base level view that suffering is going to end up happening to you in one way or another. And if you put your meaning in life in things that are in this life, and this world is very fragile, then your heart's going to break when those things break away from you. So any other thoughts or comments on that? Yeah.
I think he kind of touches on this, but I was thinking earlier, Tolstoy, when that quote was written, he said he was already an established and great writer.
Right.
Really great life. So we can look back and go, well, you're just looking at, was Tolstoy's meaning in life, right? What if Tolstoy wasn't really what he wanted to do?
Yeah.
That's the other thing is I think a lot of times we think at a certain point that we're here for one thing.
Right.
Like you talk to any glowy college kid who's like, this is my major, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
Talk to them at 30.
Yep.
Or 35 or 50, because it probably ain't what they're doing then.
And how many people end up getting jobs that relate nothing to their degree?
Yeah.
Some do, some don't.
A lot of times
Yeah.
you might think your meaning is one thing.
Right.
And even without that getting taken away, because your identity is taken, but just that ain't what you end up doing.
Right.
And so it is a weakness, to go, I determine my own meaning.
Right. There's so many forces that are outside of your control. Yeah, that's good. Any other thoughts about this? Is this making sense? When I study with the skeptics, they know these people, and they're like, oh yeah, we love Bertrand Russell and all this kind of stuff. So that you guys like the Bible, I know. So okay. So then what I do is I want to transition. Okay, if those are some of the weaknesses to consider, that and basically what you're doing is you're helping somebody realize they don't really have a real meaning in life. That's kind of a hard thing to just drop on somebody. So what you want to do is you want to give them some other resources to consider. So there's the biblical approach to meaning. So you're subtracting one thing, and then you're trying to add something else that's more appealing. And when you can contrast this with the biblical worldview, God sure does seem to understand what we need. And maybe that's an evidence that there is a God that's created us and designed us, and he knows what's best for us. So a couple things about how the Bible would address this. Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 27, then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. All right, so here's the question. What does it mean to be made in God's image? And how does this relate to having meaning in life? Have any of you ever done a word search on where this word image is used? So this same word for image is used in other places to talk about the idols and the images that the Israelites were supposed to crush and decimate when they get into the Promised Land. So God said one of the first of the 10 Commandments is that you should not make any graven images of God. So if I make an image of like a bull with big horns on it, and I say, that's God, that's my image of God, what is that missing about God? A lot of things. What is it emphasizing about God? Is he strong? Okay, so that's God. What's wrong with it? Yeah, he's also gentle like a lamb. He's a shepherd. Like there's a lot of other images. That's why like one picture that can't move, like a statue of a bull can't have emotions. It's just an image, right? It can't adequately represent a God that's much more complex than one image. So what God made in Genesis chapter 1 that can most adequately express him is what? Human beings. that can have emotions and thoughts and righteous anger and love, and he created these beings that have some of these same kind of capacities that he has. There's a lot of other things about being made in God's image, but the Bible begins by saying every person, doesn't matter what skin color you have, it doesn't matter how tall or short you are, what gender you are, you've got male and female in this text, everybody is made in God's image, which means that you've been bestowed with the privilege, unlike any animal that was made or anything else, to be an imager of him, to be somebody who represents God and imitates God in the world. Does that already sound a little bit better than we came here by this accidental explosion? And is this became a good basis that everybody has the same meaning in life and everybody is equally valuable and important? And there's a lot of questions about social justice right now. Why is it that so many people that are into social justice have a secular worldview, when it's actually the biblical worldview that provides them with the resources to be concerned about everybody equally? Do your beliefs contradict one another is one of the things. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what does this look like for someone who's agnostic and they like pick and choose?
They pick and choose what kinds of, like, I like part of Buddhism, I like part of,
So they pick and choose part of Jay Gould?
Stephen Jay Gould.
Stephen Jay
Yeah.
Gould, and they also pick and choose like God made us, so we have purpose.
Yeah, good. This is a really good question. So if somebody's like, okay, well, I like this idea in the Bible, but I don't necessarily accept that there's like a God and all that. Like, if your worldview requires that you start to borrow from other worldviews, that shows its weakness. Because the Christian worldview can be self-contained and it has everything that you need. So I would bring that up as like the fact that you have to borrow and pick shows that you've got a weakness in your worldview. And by the way, you acknowledge it, and that's why you like some of these other things. So how about you investigate what this is all about? That's a very good question. Any other thoughts or comments on the being made in God's image thing? Another aspect of being made in God's image, or of meaning in life according to the Bible, Ecclesiastes 12, verses 13 and 14, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. All right. At the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, so the beginning of the book of Ecclesiastes, what time am I supposed to be done? Okay, all right. I don't think I'll take that much time. Okay. At the beginning of the book, it's super depressing. Like, you've got all these things that Solomon tried to find fulfillment in, and all of it was vanity, trying to grasp after the wind and things like this. At the end of the book, it's almost like this is a breath of fresh air. When he says here that God is going to hold you into every deed into judgment, every secret thing, whether good or evil. Have you ever looked at this? Whenever you talk about final judgment day, you think, well, that's not good news. But in Ecclesiastes, this is like the great conclusion, and it's a breath of fresh air that he's realized this, or that he sees this. So here's my question. How does judgment relate to meaning in life? Because isn't this one of the things that skeptics don't like, is that there's Mr. God up in the air that's going to judge me for everything that I do? Why is this actually a good thing when it comes to meaning in life? Yeah.
Does someone want to answer first?
Does somebody want to answer first? Besides?
Okay, so this is just me pondering. So I know that Ecclesiastes says over and over again that life is a vapor. Now, at the same time, it says this, verse 14, mean bringing like life is a vapor, but it has meaning because of God.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. Yeah. That with life being a vapor, that this would be good news, that there's like an afterlife.
Like, not necessarily an afterlife, but the things we do literally don't mean anything.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very. Okay. So the good news of Judgment Day, he'll bring every deed into judgment, whether with every secret thing. Does that mean that every activity you engage in, is there some meaning or purpose behind it? Everything you do, planting a garden, changing your kid's diaper, everything you do, has some kind of meaning to it. If there is a God that's going to hold you into judgment for everything that you've done. If there is no God, then it doesn't matter what I'm doing. But the fact that there is a judgment day and I will be held accountable is good news, because it actually provides a meaning in my life with regards to my future. Is what I'm going to do last forever? How do I know this? Things like this. Like?
I was just gonna say, when you said the future, like when you started the class,
Yeah.
purpose and meaning in life, gives you something that like you can reflect on in the past.
Right.
You can like consider in the present, but also
Yeah, so if the Genesis 1 thing is, what are my origins, why am I here? Ecclesiastes 12 says something about my eternity in the future, right? So you got both of those aspects working for you here.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
When you talk about this, the fact that it says whether good or evil,
Uh-huh.
is that something that you can emphasize? It's like, it's not to say that like everything's gonna be fine. It's like, just know that there is something coming. There is something next after this life.
Yeah.
Like good or bad, that is totally different than the atheist worldview. Like there is nothing next.
Right.
So like the fact that belief in God means that there's something next, but it's not saying that like everything is good for everybody.
Right. Yeah, and that's obviously some of the evangelism that's taking place when you study with the skeptics, is that you're wanting them to think about some of these things. So these passages are helpful for kind of awakening them. And sometimes it's interesting to see like the emotional reaction they have to these ideas of judgment. Like a skeptic can be like very calculated in how they talk about evolutionary biology and why it proves that there's no God and stuff, and Judgment Day. Like that's how the studies go sometimes. It's like the most emotional things are about these ideas that they really hate. And one of them even said, I hope it's not true. So you got to be careful how you handle some of these things, but you do want to kind of poke these things a little bit. William?
That's kind of what I was going to say, is that I feel like a reaction that could be had to something like this is like, well, I would rather my life be meaningless, because this whole idea of like every one of my actions could be good or evil kind of has like a weight to it, or like a certain level of, I don't know, like it's kind of heavy to bear almost. You know?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, have you heard that?
Yeah, I just tell them that they're stupid. And then they're like, oh, yeah, okay. That's where you go back to the drunk thinking and sober thinking. Like, you know that you want a sense of meaning in life. You're not really satisfied. Like, why are you into all these social causes? Like, what's motivated? Like, you were built to have a real sense of meaning. God's put eternity in your heart. I wouldn't say that God put eternity in your heart thing, but these are the sorts of things that I'm thinking. But it's like, you really got to kill part of your brain, or just really ignore or really stuff certain things that you were created to have. And so you're just trying to like pull those out of people so that they're really honest with it. Kelly, were you going to say something?
Judgment relates to everything we do. Everybody has to make a judgment about every single thing.
Right.
So that's just a basic, as we're talking about, created in God's image. It's a basic thing everybody always does and has to do in everything that they do.
Right.
So we have judgment no matter what.
Yeah. And what I'm trying to do with these parts here is just show them, I'm not trying to convince you of Christianity right now, but here's in case you didn't know, here's how you could articulate the resources that Christianity offers. You're made in God's image. There's a final judgment day. So could Mr. Atheist or Mrs. Atheist, could they at least acknowledge that Christianity has got more robust resources for having meaning in life? Can you at least admit that? They might say, well, yeah, it's still a fairy tale, but I can see how you have better answers to these questions. And by the way, after I study these needs with them, meaning, identity, morality, hope, and community, when you guys helped me with that one, the last study the most recent study I had when we talked about hope, we talked about hope, is the skeptics, every time they say something's good or bad, or like, we can still be good people without God, and well, what do you mean by good? I'm always asking them what they mean by the value statements the value judgments they make. This is good, this is bad, this is harmful. How do you define all that, and how do you know what all that is? I'm always attacking the value statements that they make. And in doing that, you kind of put them in a corner where you're hoping that they've got to understand that there's some bigger answers than what their worldview can give them. But in the process, in the last study I had with them, they said, look, obviously you guys have better answers to these questions. And the conversations are never super tense. But like when you start to question the value judgments that they're making, they all backed up and they're like, yes, you guys just have better answers to these questions. And they're like, okay, great. I'm glad that you saw that. If you think Christianity is just like a beautiful Disney movie right now, but you still think it's a myth, you're in a really good place. Because you at least see the beauty of it. And now you're ready, guess what? For the objective evidences. Here's the archaeological evidence for God, for the Bible. Here's the arguments why Jesus really rose from the dead. Because as long as your heart doesn't want those things to be true, you're going to argue like the weirdest things about evolution to prove that you don't actually have to serve God. because you don't want it to be true. But if you get to a point where you want it to be true by seeing that there's better resources here, now your heart's open to the objective reasonings that was maybe more common in the 90s and the early 2000s. I thought I saw another hand. Yeah.
Well, it was before you moved on to that much more important point.
Oh, that's fine.
But in regards to these verses here, the end of 13, for this is the whole duty of man, keeping his commandments. You know, I'm not going to go through all the commandments of God, but as Jesus summed them up, it came to fearing God and loving one another.
Right, that's right.
And that's a lot less of a, I think that's a lighter weight. When considering the fact that, you know, you're going to be judged, it's judged on how you love one another and how you've shown fearful and respectful love to God.
Yep.
Versus, you know, God asks you to jump through 500 hoops and do these jumping jacks. And
Right.
You're judged on your love.
Yep.
And
Which is something, it's not about your talent. It's something that everybody can do. Yeah. Good. Yeah, Lindsay?
Is there an argument to be made from this? You know, it's one thing for me to say, what I do has no meaning and want to keep it in my bubble because I'm only going to talk about me. I don't want to make, you know,
Mm-hmm.
about anybody else. That's one thing. And yet everyone has been hurt or knows someone who has been deeply hurt by someone else.
Right.
In which case, suddenly, this idea of judgment can become very comforting.
Right.
Because, and I don't know, you implied anyway that oftentimes you'll find there's not a tremendous amount of true intellectual honesty sometimes in this.
No, there is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you have someone who's really intellectually honest and will say, yeah, I actually do want evil people judged.
Right.
And done, you know, and whether that's someone who's done evil to them, someone who's done evil to someone they love, someone who's doing evil things to women in Afghanistan, whatever. I guess just is there an argument to be made?
Oh, for sure.
When you start talking about if there is judgment on the evil things you see in this world.
Right.
That means there is meaning to those things.
Right.
And if there's a meaning to the things those people do, might there not also be meaning in what you do?
Exactly. Like, are you really satisfied saying that Hitler ends up in the same place as, well, Gandhi, I just found out recently, was into sex trafficking, so I can't say that one. She did the same thing, I just heard. So, yeah, I don't know. But the common examples that people bring up, like, are you really comfortable saying that Hitler is in the same place as whatever favorite elder you've ever had is, or preacher, or whatever, I don't know. Like, that's that's a tough pill to swallow. By the way, one of the things that I do bring up with the skeptics is that they get really offended. This is kind of a little bit of a rabbit hole, but they get really offended by the book of Joshua when the Israelites are supposed to go and take care of all the Canaanites and whatnot. My argument to them in that regard is if you lived in that time period and you were living as a neighbor to the Canaanites and you saw that they were offering all their children as sacrifices and they were brutally attacking each other and they were just very immoral people. God waited a long time for their sin to become ripe, like Genesis 15 says. If you lived back then and nothing happened to those people, your question as a skeptic would be, why doesn't God have justice? Why doesn't he care about punishing the wicked? And then as soon as he does something about it, you got a problem with it. So you can't have it both ways. So yeah, judgment has got a lot of good things, especially like even how political our country is right now. Let's say you're talking to somebody who hates that political side or that political person. You're okay just saying he's going to be 6 feet underground? That's it? Yeah, Blake?
I know you didn't get the last one, but like you're trying to think of a good person to compare to.
Jeffrey Dahmer.
Okay,
Yeah.
An awful person.
He was actually baptized.
But like,
Yeah, by Roy Ratcliffe in Wisconsin. I think he's,
Wisconsin, okay.
yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah, I know. So like, if this whole thing is about it's the emotional side, a lot of it at least is the emotional side, and somebody that quotes are personal from the atheistic
Right.
perspective. I mean, why can't it be like, are you really okay saying that your sweet grandma is like what she has done is at the same value and deserves the same as the worst possible person you think? Or well, it doesn't have to be grandma, but like.
Right.
Do you think
That their end is the same. Yeah, oh, for sure, yeah.
Don't think about like a famous person.
Right.
Think about very personal individual for them. You think that's helpful?
Oh, for sure, yeah, yeah. Because you're trying to poke them and prod them and say, like, how much can you really think deeply about your worldview and be satisfied with it? and you're just trying to depress people. Because in our country, you can't, how do I say this in a good way? In this country, we've got so many comforts and stuff, and if you go to Africa and or some poor countries, somewhere in India or something, and you're trying to help them understand hope and the gospel, people are going to be a lot more receptive to it there than they are here, right? Because we've got all the things that we need and everything. So like this country is not manufacturing suffering for people, right? Like, I mean, daily constant suffering like you would have in other countries. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to manufacture mental suffering for people in these studies so that they're driven on their knees to see that God is the only answer. Because their circumstances are probably not going to do that for them in this country. I don't mean that in any kind of unloving way, though. I think like when Paul talks about destroying lofty arguments, like demolishing these things, that means he's demolishing things that are cherished by people, right? And so you got to show the weaknesses of these things, yeah.
I think what you just said is also a reason why talking to people that have gone through a lot of suffering because of the circumstances in this country even are the ones that like maybe we disagree on a lot of fundamental beliefs, but the one thing that they will do is they're gonna say something about God. They're gonna say something about Jesus, like very underprivileged areas.
Yeah.
A lot of times, those are people who they've gone through real stuff.
Right.
And again, I might disagree with them on a lot of beliefs, but like one thing my experience has said, as limited as it is that like they believe to some degree. Like,
Wait, I'm at Embry Hills on Sunday. I'm preaching on Luke 14, the parable of the great banquet that nobody comes to until they have to go to the highways and the hedges and all these things. Have you ever noticed the excuses that people are making there? I just bought a field and I have to go look at it. I bought some oxen, 5 yokes of oxen, and I have to go look at them, and I just got married. Do you realize that all of those things that are excuses to not come to the banquet are all things that people that are privileged could have? Like your wealth is what allowed you to buy that property, and your wealth is what allowed you to buy those oxen, and your ability to be married. Not everybody is going to be married, and all these things. And it's like your privileges are blinding you to what you really need. Do you suppose that's pretty relevant in our country today? What about when you're studying with skeptics in these ways? You got to awaken people to these things. Okay, notice the last thing about meaning for the Christian worldview. If one of the biggest problems with the secular worldview is that suffering, even if we are shielded from a lot of it in this country, eventually death will at least happen. If suffering can take away what you have meaning in life in, is that true for the Christian? Does suffering take away the meaning in life for a Christian? Look at 1 Peter 2:20 and 21. For what credit is it if, when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. So for the secular person, suffering is going to take them away from their meaning in life. At least the ultimate conclusion of suffering, which is death, will take them away from their meaning in life. But for the Christian, you can suffer now. You can have lots of difficulties now. But what does it do with regards to your meaning in life, of being an imager of God and thinking about final judgment day? Yeah, it actually helps us live up to our purpose. Like in 2 Corinthians 4, he talks about death at work in us, but life in you, that we're caring about, and our bodies, the death of Jesus every day, and all this kind of stuff, that we're suffering, but it's actually propagating the gospel, and it's becoming a way that my meaning in life can be more fulfilled and happen in a more robust way. So Christianity, does it have better resources for having a sense of meaning in life? Clearly it does. You might still disagree with it, but this is only the first class. But in these classes, you're just trying to kind of tilt the scales to help them see that Christianity makes more emotional sense than maybe what you've thought about before. But you just got to be prodded and poked to think about these things. Does this make sense so far? I need some head nods or some no's. Okay, this is making sense? Kind of. All right, what's your question? All right, that's fine. Yeah, I welcome any comments or questions on any of this. Like I said, this is what I do when I study with skeptics. And after the first 4 or 5 classes, that's when they start seeing at least that Christianity is more beautiful. But this is a cumulative thing, so this is just the first class. Yeah.
Genuine question: where do you find
On Meetup, I have a Meetup study for skeptics and atheists. So it's Atlanta Skeptics and Atheists Bible Study. And so I say in my bio that I'm a Christian. I think Christianity makes better sense of the world than secularism, and I want to try to convince you of that sort of thing. And so I get people that come. And then in that first group that I studied with, one of them was converted, him and his wife, and then they started inviting a bunch of atheists to the second time that we were going through this stuff. So sometimes it's kind of like a show and tell sort of thing too. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments? All right, well, we're done. Sorry I went a little over time. I went through that a little bit more slowly than I wanted to, or that I thought I was going to. Do we have a song or anything? Or are we done?
That'll be it for tonight. Yeah. We need announcements or anything, or?
Tim is, I don't want to say it. Tim is still recovering from COVID. Richard isn't feeling well, hasn't got his COVID test back yet, but he's feeling okay. He just had a sore throat. David is out of town. I asked if I could announce him. He never texted that. So no answer is, I guess.
Means I get to answer.
Oh, yeah. So David's dad fell, and I don't know the update, but like he went down to Florida. Was it yesterday?
Yeah, so his dad fell, apparently they were both sick, we didn't know that. Dad gets up, falls. Mom gets up to help dad, falls.
Oh, no.
Dad calls 911 using Alexa, which is a pretty fun detail in the story. Alexa, call 911. So he was pretty banged up, they kept him in the hospital, they were both like dehydrated. So they're kind of fun, like, but he's helping them out. And his mom's really the one, if y'all want to pray, who's just kind of been not in good health for a while. But he's just getting them all squared away, back at home. He's coming home Saturday, so
Gotcha.
that's the story. And an ad for a lifetime. Much to my chagrin.
That's all I know as far as announcements.
We've got the brunch for Robin and Paulette on Saturday morning, so if you can make it to that, 11 to 1, come and go as you want. There'll be a few of us there with, I think Angel's making some shrimp and grits, so here's that. And then I think we're gonna be trying, I have kind of dropped the ball and put this together, but we're gonna be trying to put together a little bit of like a goodbye gift for Robin and Paulette as well, so stay tuned on that. We'll get more details out there for that
Yeah.
soon, so.
I think there's a ladies' study starting soon. Is that right?
On Tuesday.
On Tuesday. On Tuesday at 7. Okay. So I don't know the details, but I'm not a lady, so reach out to Morgan or someone else. That's a lady, I guess.
So my best friend, she's been having lupus her whole life, but now like her lupus is like active against her kidneys, and she just turned 24, and now things have just drastically gone downhill, like drastically. So her kidneys are being attacked, and like other parts of her other organs are being attacked as well. For people who don't know, lupus attacks your organs, so. Yeah, and Ebony Nicole, so.
Well, a lot to pray for, so let's just make sure we're reaching out to each other and keeping up with each other. So, all right. I think the kids are probably needing to come back in. So we'll go ahead and wrap up for tonight then, and we'll be back Sunday.
Josh, do you wanna pray for us real quick, just to kind of close this out?
All right, let's go ahead and pray. Our Lord, we come before you this evening, thankful to be in your presence, thankful to be made in your image, to be your children, to be loved by you, thankful to be loved by one another. Thank you, Lord, for all that you have done for us. Thank you for giving us meaning and giving us fulfillment even before we were here. Thank you for looking out for us, Lord, and even eternally looking out for us and our souls. We pray for those among our number who are physically suffering, including Tim, who traveled back to the other side of the United States. Thank you for all that they've meant to us, and we ask that you continue to use them in your kingdom. Lord, we pray also for David's parents who have fallen. Lord, thank you for that working out so that they were able to get help, and thank you for your providence there. And we wish them and David nothing but Godspeed as they work to the best solution that they can. And we also pray for Camilla's friend Ebony Nicole, and her health, and we pray that she may have a portion of her health restored, and that you may be glorified in that, and that she may be brought closer to you in studies, and thank you for Erik and what he's sharing with us, and for the hearts of those